Hello everybody, DJ here. This is going to be a beginner tutorial series on a hair simulation for beginners. What you're going to be learning is how to create a hair simulation, how to make it a little bit rough, how to shade it properly, and render it out so you get a really nice looking image. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and I also have a Patreon. The link is below. I will be providing a lot of free things like textures and objects and session files for those of you who want to become a patron. And before we jump into Blender, what I'd actually like you to do is go ahead and grab a couple things online. So what I like to do is get some reference material, and I actually have this shaving set. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but it does help to have some things available to you. So go ahead and go into Google, do a search for the bevel shaving set. We're basically going to be creating this shaving brush right here. So take a one or however many photos you think is going to really help you out to create this sort of thing. And you can create some other ones like these too. It's really up to you on what you want to do with this. You can take the ideas here and make whatever you want for the shaving brush, the shape, and all that. But for me and the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to be creating this one right here. So go ahead and take one of those images, save it to your hard drive in a place that you know where it's at, and we'll be using that as a reference. The next thing you're going to want to do is to go over to HDRI Haven, and it's very simple. It's just hdrihaven.com. You're going to go down the list here on the left, and you're going to go to Studio, and you're going to grab the Small Studio 1, which is right here. You can also do a search right up here. You can just type in Small Studio 1 right up here in the top right. And you're going to download that whatever size you think you can actually use on your computer. The bigger the better, but 4K should work just fine. The next thing you're going to want to do is we're going to put this on an actual surface. So go over to texturehaven.com and take a look at anything in here if you'd like. For me, I'm just going to be using this concrete floor painted right here. You're going to want to go in there and download all the maps, and I'll show you a really quick way that you can create a PBR material super quick onto the surface of a plane, and you'll be able to set up your scene very quickly. So let's go ahead and jump into Blender here, and you can see on the bottom left, for those of you who are new, I have some screencast keys right here, and I have the keyboard and the mouse available so you can see all of my button commands. So how we're going to start this out is probably different than a lot of people. We're actually going to be creating some unique shapes here. So let's go ahead and delete both of these items here. And we'll leave the camera there and we'll turn it off for the moment. And what we're going to do is we're just going to start with a circle. So you're going to go to Shift A, add circle. And here where it says add circle, we're just going to keep it at 32 vertices right now, just to, leave it at the standard. We really don't need to do anything with this, and we'll just leave it at 32. We're going to hit 7 here to go to the top view and go into edit mode. So what we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to be creating a mesh in which the hair is going to be emitted from. Now I already know what the shape is going to look like, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to split the panel, go to the image editor, and I'm just going to open the reference material. And you can see that this is basically what we're going to be looking at doing right here. So this is the shape we're going for. Now I know how to make this, and most of you don't. And so you're just going to have to follow me right now with the process to kind of learn why we're doing what we're doing. So we're going to start with a circle because the circle is going to emit the hair going straight up. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go into edit mode here. So make sure that your circle object is selected. Go into edit, hit E to extrude, right click, scale in, and what we're going to do is we're going to hit M and then merge at the center. Okay? The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do face select right here, and we're going to box select all of these faces right here. And right now I'm in solid mode. You can do this also in wireframe, and we're going to hit I to inset. And that's going to basically create more wedge shapes. And we're going to bring this pretty far down, and you can hold shift to sort of fine tune that down to the center right about there. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control R, and that's going to start to create some loop cuts. And we're just going to roll on the mouse wheel up until we get some nice, even, or at least as close as possible, even squares. So something like probably this. Left click to sort of set that there, and then right click to set it where it was. And we're going to have something like this. It's sort of like a target shape. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're just going to throw in, and I'm just going to move this over here and get rid of that for the time being. We're going to take a look at this, and we're going to add a hair simulator that will shoot some hair particles straight up. Okay. And what you'll do is you go over here on the right, go to where it says particle properties, hit the plus button, and that will create a particle system. Now, if I bring my timeline up here and I hit play, you can see that it's just creating some particles that are falling through. And what we need to do is we don't want this to be just an emitter, we want there to be hair. Okay? So go ahead and left click the hair one, and you'll see that it is going straight down. What that means is that the normals, if I go to edit mode here and go to face right here, and then if we go up here to the viewport overlays and go down to where it says normals right here, click the one that says faces right here, and you'll see that if you click and drag this size right here, there are some lines pointing straight down. What that's saying is that if you're going to have a hair emission, they're going to go straight down. Well, we want them to go straight up. Okay. So what we do here is we're just going to go ahead and hit A, go up to mesh, and then you're going to go down to normals and click flip. And that's going to make them go straight up. Now, if we hit tab to go back into object mode, and if you don't know what I'm doing, if you look at the top left over here, you can click this and go to object, edit, or whatever you want to do up here. You can see that all of the hair is now going straight up. Okay, great. So the next thing here is I have a very high powered computer with a very high powered GPU, which most people are not going to have. So what you want to do starting out with doing anything like this is you want to take the number and you want to put it down pretty low. We're just going to put it at 10 at the moment, just so that we can get the general ideas of what's going on with the hair, sort of preview what we're looking at here without it taking too much of the computing power. So if you'll see right here under emission, we have the number right here, which you can type in 100 or 500. It always starts at 1,000. You have a seed, which basically randomly generates where these things go. The length, which if you click and drag this up and down, it will make it longer or shorter. And we're just going to put that back to a 4. And the segments, which basically means how many times these are going to be separated or segmented to create some sort of motion when we start to add some dynamics to this. The next thing you're going to see here is source, so you go ahead and click that down. And basically what this does is it's sort of like we'll place this in different sort of patterns throughout. And we're really not going to do too much with this right here. The next thing right here is called hair dynamics. And this is where the hair is actually going to interact with the gravity and with the object in the scene. So we're going to go ahead and click that on. And we're going to take this slider back to the beginning of the playhead and hit 1 to go to the front view here and hit play. And you'll notice that nothing really happens. Now, the reason for this is because our object is basically just a flat disk with a bunch of segmentations here. And what we really want it to do is we want it to follow the normal, meaning if we go into edit mode here, you can see the normals are just kind of pointed straight up. We want it to kind of follow a normal so that when the hair starts to dynamically move, it will follow more of the shape here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit pause, go back to the beginning of the playhead, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the vertex select right here, and we're actually going to get rid of this by moving this over. Just keep this in mind on the right here, that the shape of that brush is sort of that dome shape, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in, we're going to left click and drag, or you can just select this middle one right here. You're going to hit O, okay? And if we look right up here, there's a little thing that gets turned on. And this is right here, proportional editing. What that means is if we hit G and Z, you'll see this big sort of shape. And it might be really small and it might be really, really big. But what it does is as you move that object up and down on the Z axis, you can see that the shape of the object is changing, sort of like a ramping effect to the different parts of your object. Let's go ahead and right click to set it back where it was. Now what we want to do is we want to make a really nice and easy dome, sort of like this shape. And in order to do that, we have to actually change the shape right up here in the proportional editing fall off. So if you left click this and go down to sphere, what we can do, and we'll just move to a different view here so we can see what's going on, hit G, then Z, and pull it up. And you can see that now it's more of a spherical shape that's being created. And if we go up on the mouse wheel or down, we can create a larger or smaller shape. And what we want to do is we want to leave this ring right here. I just held Alt and left click this ring around the edge, this loop. We want that to stay where it is. But the center and everything else, we want to kind of just pull that up just a bit so that we can get a sort of doming effect on our object. So let's go ahead and you can hit G and then Z and then move the shape or the size of your brush to be smaller or larger, depending on if yours is larger or smaller, to get this dome shape going just like this. And you can hold shift to make an easier sort of adjustment. And we want it to be just a bit. So we're just going to go right about there. Okay. And left click to set it. So from this point here, you can see that if we look at the normals, the strands are just going straight up basically from where those planes are. Okay. And if we go back into edit mode, or sorry, go back into object mode here by hitting tab, you can see that now the shaping is more angular. With hair dynamics on, let's go ahead and hit play. And you can see that now there's quite a bit of a different effect happening. Now the hair is sort of bending down and animating in kind of a different way. You can see that there's a bit of dynamics going on here. And what we can do here is we can change how those dynamics work. You can change the segmentation to increase the amount of basically the areas where this thing can bend. So if we change this segment to 10, for example, let it go back to the front, you can see that it has more dynamics going on in how it's sort of falling here. Let's just change that back to a 5 and make sure you go back to the beginning of the playhead to sort of set that when you make some adjustments here. And let's go down to the hair dynamics on the right. And quality steps, we're going to leave that where it is. And what we actually want to do here is we actually want to change the structure. Okay, so if you left click on this structure right here, you're going to see a bunch of different stuff. And what we want is, if I bring this back over here, and we go to the image editor and bring back up our reference, this is made out of some sort of animal hair or something. I'm not really sure what it's made of, but it's very stiff. And if you have a shaving brush handy and you just kind of touch it, it's very stiff. It's not like regular hair. It kind of sticks up more straight. Even though there's a little bit of bending and stuff like that, it sticks up more straight than this. And how we can change that and get this standing more straight up is by changing the stiffness right here. We're just going to type in a 2.5 and let that kind of do what it does. And you can see that as you do that, it sort of stays up more straight. And now, when we go up and we add more segments, if we want to make it a little bit more lively, go back to the beginning, you can see that it's more stiff, but there is a little bit more of a spring to it since we have more segmentation in the actual object or the actual strands. So you can play with this if you want, but what we're going to end up doing is the final result to get more close to what we want here. We're going to change the stiffness to a 3. Okay? And that's going to let us have a little bit more of a stiff bend in our shaping here. What we're also going to do is we're going to change our emission here from the number 100 to 1000. And you should be able to handle this just fine, hopefully. If you can't, you can lower it a bit if it doesn't work for you. And just kind of take a look and observe what's happening to the hair as you do that. So we can see that if we zoom in really closely here, you can see that a lot of the hairs are kind of gathered around very specific areas. It is sort of random, but if on yours it seems like they might be a little bit too close to each other and not as sort of evenly spread out as you'd like it to be, what we're going to do is we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier to this. So if we go to our modifiers here and we add a subdivision surface, and let's go ahead and just do 2 here. And let's put it right before the particle setting. So left click and drag this little tab right here up. You can see that now the subdivision is creating more of a sort of randomness and I'll turn it off and on here with this real time here. You can see that it sort of like creates more of a randomness or evenness to the distribution of these throughout the entire disk that we've created. And if we hit play again, you can see that the the shaping of this is a little bit more realistic. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create a little bit of what's called a collision around the sides here. Because as you can see on the right, the shaping of this object here, the sort of like grip of this um, beard shaving brush, you can see that there is this tight little beveled circular section right in here. So what we want to do is we want to actually create this, or go to mesh here, and we're going to create a cylinder. And if you left click that, it'll create a cylinder here. We'll go to wireframe, and if we go to hit 7, you can see that the cylinder, it's 32 vertices, that's what we have it as, which is the exact same as the circle that we created for the emission. So it's basically the same amount of subdivisions all the way around. Okay. Now the next thing that we're going to do here is let's go ahead and turn off the circle really quick. Okay. And we're going to go to face select right here. We're going to select the top, and let's go to solid mode so it's easier. Select the top, and we're going to shift left click the bottom, hit X, and we're going to delete the faces. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to create some depth with this cylinder, and we're going to scale it out in everything except the Z. So that we're basically going to create a ring that's going to tighten around our hair here. Okay? So you're going to hold Alt and left click this entire loop of faces. You're going to hit E, then we're going to right click, hit S for scale. Oh, let's actually turn off proportional editing real quick because we have it on. You can see that it's moving everything. So right click, hit O to remove the proportional editing, hit S, Shift Z, and then scale out. So like pull your mouse out, okay? And then hit tab. So now we have a 3-dimensional shape here, okay? And if we turn back on our circle with our hair emission, you can see how much of that hair is actually going outside of our shape. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the front view here, go to wireframe. We're just going to hit G, hit Z, and pull it down a bit so that the top ends up right about here. Okay? The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of an animation of the scale for this whole object. Okay? So we're going to go here to Item. We're going to go to the scale. We're going to actually, let's go and do the ending frame first. So go to frame 30. So just left click 30 here, right click the scale, and select Insert Keyframes. Then go to frame 1, and you're going to hit S, Shift Z, and just hold Shift and scale it up a bit to about there. Okay? Then we're going to right click and hit Insert Keyframes. Now, if we hit play here, nothing's really going to happen. And if it is kind of a slow playback, what you can do is click on the hair emitter and change the number down to about 250 or 100 or something like that and let it come back around again, just so you can see it a little bit faster. And what we need to do here is we have to actually set this object as a collider with our hair. So hit pause, we'll go back to frame 1, and then over here, you're going to go to the Physics Properties tab. And I'm just going to left click and drag this over, just like that. Over here, you're going to see where it says Collision, and we're going to left click on that. Okay, we're just going to leave everything exactly as it is. Now, when we hit play, you'll notice that it's now interacting with our hair emitter. So if I change this back to 1,000, we'll see it a little bit more obvious. You can see that now the edges are being interacted with on the side with our cylinder object here, our collision object. So the good thing about this is it basically shows that you can create, let's say that, and don't do this right now, you guys, just I will show you what I mean. If I grab this and I move it up here, you can see how you can basically create a hair emission where you have some sort of collider object that defines how those hairs are actually interacting with the scene. Now, obviously, this is not the best situation to have it sort of like this because it's kind of going through here, but you can kind of get the idea. So let's set this back to where it was. I'm just going to grab it back on Z, actually. Yeah, let's just go G, Z, move it back down to here. and we'll just go ahead and hit play. Okay. So now we have kind of like a emission that is showing the overall sort of dynamics of this. But the only problem here is that if we take a look again, and I just closed it, but if we take a look again here at the reference material, you can see that the length changes over time. You have much longer length in the middle of this object or in this hair, and then as it goes to the sides, it's a lot shorter. And what we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to be creating a weight paint that's going to drive the length of all of these hairs. So what I'm going to do here is on the right panel, if you haven't split it already and if you don't have this open, over here, I'm going to actually split this like so. Okay, so now I have a the 3D viewer over here. I'm going to hit 1 just so we can see the front view. We have our reference material up at the top here. And then on the bottom here, I'm actually going to make the timeline a lot smaller. Let's push it down here. Up here, I'm going to change this to a 3D viewport. Okay, so I'm going to leave that just like that. Actually, let's just go to a front view here. And we're going to have this here, and we're going to have this right down here. Okay, I'm going to hit T, and that will just hide that stuff over there. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're actually going to click on the emission like this. And you're going to go up here from object mode. You're going to go to weight paint. Okay. Now, there's a lot of people who would say that you basically can just take the brush and just start painting this. But I'm going to show you a better way to make this a little bit more accurate and a little bit more even as far as how this is being generated right here. So if we go over here in this panel and we hit 7 just to look at the top, what we're actually going to use is a gradient. And before we actually start doing this, let's go ahead and go to File, Save As, and we're going to call this, you can call this whatever you want, but we're going to call this Hair Emission Tutorial Part 1. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and save. So go ahead and go over here to the gradient, okay? And if you click on Radial, and if we hit N to open up our tool panel over here, go down to Tool, and you can see here that we have different settings. We have a weight, we have a strength, we have symmetry that we're not going to really deal with right now. But we're going to go here on this, in this panel here, and hit the wireframe shading so that we can actually see the middle of our object. And if you left click in the center and drag out, you can start to see a sort of like gradient effect happening here. Okay, and it's kind of rainbow-like. If we go over here onto our particle properties and go down the list here, so kind of like scroll down, you're going to see what's called vertex groups. Now, without you knowing it, what you've actually created is a vertex group. And if you go over here to where it says object data properties, you can see right here it says vertex groups group. Okay, double click that, and we're going to call this length. Then go back to your particle settings, go down the list, and you'll see where it says vertex groups, there's density, length, all kinds of stuff, right? But really what we want is right here, length. So left click that and click on length. And now you can see if you zoom in here, and if you have more particles, you can actually see it a little bit easier. You can see that now the hair length is now changing, where in the center, it's really tall, and then on the sides, it's really, really short. So what we're going to do to make this a little bit more like what we see here is we're going to change a couple of our property settings to make this a little bit easier for us. Now, the easy way to just sort of delete what you've done here is if you change this weight right here to a 0, and then just left click and drag out really far, you can set that back to a 0. It's kind of the easiest way that I know to do it, just to show you guys right now without getting too complex. What we're going to do is we're actually going to change how this gradient is being applied, because if we, and just watch what I'm doing here, if I take this and I left click and drag out, okay, and I go, okay, well, that's a little bit too extreme. We need it to be a little bit shorter on the sides, but not that short. If I try it again, it's going to kind of overwrite what I did before, but it can't really, uh, You can't really like add to it or change it in a very easy way. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to where it says draw, click on that. And right here where it says mix, change this to add. Okay. Actually, before we do that, go ahead and we're going to actually delete, go weight to 0. And we're just going to go ahead and do that again to delete everything. Okay. So go back to draw, and then we're going to go where it says brush settings and it says mix. We're going to change this to add. Okay. Then change back to the gradient, and where it says weight in the tool, change this to something like a 0.25 or something like that. And then left click and drag from the center. And you can see that what we're doing here is it's a lot more subtle. Okay. And if we look here, and if we go to wireframe, it's a little bit easier to see. You can see that now the way that this is being created is a little bit less severe. Now, what you could do is you could go up here on your particles list and you can change the hair length from a 4 to a 10 or something. And you're not really seeing that because we have to actually change into the object mode to really see that. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the add that we changed this to. Remember, if I go back here, we change this blend to add. Go back to the gradient. And basically what you can do is you can keep left clicking and dragging from the center to change the shaping as you see fit. Okay, and if we zoom out, we can really see the shaping of this. And if we go right like this, we can sort of left click and drag from the center again, pull it out, and do something more kind of like this. Okay, and you can keep changing this back if you go to, if you feel like you've gone too far and it's red and you don't really know what's going on anymore, you can go back to the draw, set this from add to mix, go back to gradient, change the weight to a 0, and then go and drag this out again just like that if you want to start back from the beginning. And you'll kind of get the hang of it. And one of the things to do here is just to keep practicing and getting used to the tools. Go back to paint, change the mix to add, go back to the gradient, make sure that you're on radial, change the weight back to a 0.25, and then try again. And once you do this a couple times, you'll kind of get the hang of it and you'll be able to create whatever shape it is that you want relatively easily by doing this once, twice, or even 3 or 4 times. Okay? So maybe we do something like that. Now, one thing that you can do if you feel like when you've done this, it's a little bit chunky, there's some areas that seem like really obvious in one particular length and not in the other, you could go over here to the blur and you could blur some areas. You could try to smudge, but really you're going to end up with some unevenness going on. So I would recommend only doing that if you really find there's an issue. You can also average. You can use the average brush and just kind of move around a little bit. Hit F to change the brush size, or you can change the brush radius right up here. It's really up to you on if you want to use some of those, but I think overall, just make sure that you're using the gradient to sort of create this shaping here. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go from weight paint back to object mode, go and take the timeline here back to the beginning and hit play, and you'll see that now you have your hair simulation acting a little bit more of what we can expect to see here. And from here, we can also take the hair length and we can go back to the first frame. Make sure you go back to the first frame when you do this. You can change the hair length from here to get it where you'd like it to be, but I'm just going to keep it at 4. And we're just going to use this. Next, what we're going to do is we're just going to hit play and make sure that this is pretty much what we're looking for it to do. You could change the number of segments if you'd like, or change the length if you need to, depending on what you're using as your reference material. It's really up to you on what you want to do, but we're going to get ready to cache this so that the simulation is pretty much done and baked into our scene. So let's go back. We're actually going to change the number of the emission here to 1,000. So it's going to be something like this. And this actually lets you see a little bit more of what's going on with the shaping. We're going to hit play and see how this is shaping up. And it's looking pretty good, I think. And what's basically happening here is that your computer is actually caching this so that when you play through this again, it doesn't have to reevaluate and change that. So what we're going to do here is if you play it all the way through your timeline, and it's not really doing anything here, you could change the cache number, but we're not going to do that for the purposes of this. We're going to hit pause and you can see this red line going all the way across. So go over here to cache in your particle properties here and go down the list and you're going to see right here current cache to bake. Okay, so go ahead and left click that, and now we can go back to the beginning and play it through, and you can see that now the uh, hair is sort of simulating and we don't really have to do much else to it. This next big part here that we're going to talk about has to do with children. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to a frame where it seems like the hair is pretty much settled down. So maybe around frame 200 or something like this. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called children, where around every single one of these strands, there's going to be more supplied. And we're going to change sort of like a tangled roughness to it and sort of change some properties to make it look a little bit more realistic. Because right now it's very uniform, even though we've created this sort of like changing in the overall length and all that. We do need to create some sort of variance, and we need to fill this up to have it be a lot more like we see right here in the reference photograph. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go down the list here to the section called children, and make sure that you have this selected when you do this. And what we're going to do here is we're also going to collapse all this stuff. So I'm just going to left click and drag these, and we're just going to have this and Control S to save. So down here in the children section, you have two different selections. You have what's called simple, which basically just duplicates what's already there and makes a whole bunch that fills it up, or what's called interpolated. And the two do change the way that this is done, and I do recommend using the interpolated. And since I've done this before, I already know how many we're going to end up wanting, but this is really up to you and what your computer can handle. I'm pretty sure that with this cache, you should be able to handle this just fine, but for the amount that we're going to be using here, we're going to be putting in 20 for the display, not 203. And the render amount we're going to be setting to 20. Now, what you can do is you can change the display amount to a lot less, like 5 or something like that, if you're running into problems with your computer handling it. But I think you guys should be okay with just 20. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go down the list. And there's a lot of other things here we're really not going to deal with because I want to keep this very simple for you guys. We're going to make this so that it actually has more of a rough feel, like the reference material has. And what we're going to do to make that happen is we're going to go down to the roughness right here. And we're not going to be using a roughness curve or anything like that. We're just going to be creating some generalized roughness here to make this look a little bit more sort of randomized. Okay? So if we take this right here where it says uniform, and if you hold shift, left click, and drag, you can see that now there's some sort of waviness happening to the whole thing. Okay? Throughout the entire piece. And basically, what you have to sort of imagine is that there's sort of like a pattern that's being put into this to create randomization throughout the hair pieces or the hair emission. And down here on the size, that's the size of the noise going throughout all of your strands. So right now this is making some, and if we pump this really far up, you can see that it's really sort of going all over the place. And it's not really conducive to what we're trying to do here. So what we need to do is take the size here and bring it way down. And I know that the size we want is actually right here. So 0.01. And you can see it kind of looks really messy and crazy. And that's because the uniform is up really high. And what we really need to put here is something like a 0.25. And if we look at this a little bit closer, you can see that now there's some roughness that's happening. And if you take the uniform here and you take it down to 0, and you pump it up, you can see that you're sort of creating this sort of randomization throughout your object. Okay? The next thing that we're going to do here is right here where it says random, we're going to use this as well. And the same thing here, if we do random and we left click and drag this up, you can see that it starts to really kind of push things around in a funky way. And the size here is going to determine sort of how big the noise pattern is going to be going throughout this object. And we want to take this size, we want to bring this all the way down as well. And you can see that that starts to create some really crazy stuff, just like we saw in this one here. And we're going to take this random, pull it down a bit. And really it's going to be up to you on how you want to do this. But I think a small value really helps because you get a couple of these strands that sort of stick off just like that there. So the next thing that we need to do here is we are actually going to change the kind of subdivisions going on in the hair particles. So if we kind of look closely, you can see that it's still a little bit straight. And we can change that by going back, deleting our bake cache here, hitting this delete bake and changing the number of segments to a 10 or something. But what we want to do here is we actually want to change this up a little bit. So let's go to render properties, and we haven't changed this yet, but we're going to be using cycles. We're not going to be using Eevee for this. If your device is CPU, if that works really well for you, go ahead and use that. I'm going to use the GPU. I'm going to go down here where it says hair. And you can see right here it says curve subdivisions. And if you start to pump this up, you're going to see that it goes up to however many you want, but you're not really seeing anything change here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this to a 4, and I'm going to show you how you can actually preview this inside of our particles. So what you need to do is go to your particle properties, and let's just collapse a couple of these things and go down to viewport display. Okay. And you see where it says strand steps? Pump this up to like a 4. And you can see that once we do that, it really starts to show that there's a lot of noise happening here and a lot of randomization in the strand shapes. And this is where I would say you kind of want to play with this to see what suits you and how much your computer can handle it and how much you really want to get into the details here. And if we go back into the children and we go back into the roughness, you can kind of use this opportunity to go in and adjust the roughness to kind of get more of what you think that should look like according to whatever your reference material is. Sometimes these can be a lot more rough than I put it. Sometimes they can be more smooth. It's really up to you and how you want this to start looking. One thing I'll recommend to you is in your viewport display, if you have this set to a 4, make sure that your render curve subdivisions here in the hair settings inside of your render properties, make sure that this is set to a 4 as well. If it's set to something higher, you're going to get something you're not expecting to see. And if it's set to something lower, you're going to get something not quite as cool looking as you might have been looking at with the previewer on. Okay, so next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and shade this. Now, before we shade it, what we want to do here, make sure that you save your session. We're going to go in and we're going to add an HDRI. So hit your world properties here, or click on the world properties, go to surface, click where it says color on this little ball right here, click on environment texture, and you're going to open wherever you saved that HDRI map. So I have it right here in a folder. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go up here to the cylinder. We're going to turn that off. And we're going to look at this, but I want to show you if this ends up being really, really difficult for you to deal with. I'm going to show you how you can render this using your camera and just sort of isolating a small section to see that instead of the whole scene. So for me, I'm going to go up to Edit, Preferences, and I'm using optics with my RTX 3090. And make sure you go to add-ons here and make sure that you have what's called Node Wrangler checked on right here. And you're going to save this here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look at this in the rendered view. Now, again, I have a very high powered GPU, so you are probably not seeing this as quickly as mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can very quickly change your render setting to see a smaller section and be able to actually see what's going on. So let's hit 0 to go to the camera. We're going to go to solid mode as well. Go to view, click on camera to view, and you're going to sort of move the camera around to where you can see all of your hair, right, like this. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go to where it says output properties. You're going to click on render to region. And if I go to the rendered view here, it's no longer rendering the area outside of the window. We're also going to click on crop to render region right here. And if you click on your camera up here in the tree, you can see that now you have these little, oops, that actually happens sometimes with my add-on. So just give me a moment here. Just an FYI for all of you, when I turn on my screencast keys right here and I do this, it will sometimes crash Blender. So that's all that you were seeing here. You shouldn't be seeing that since you're not using that particular add-on. So again, all you need to do here is go to your output settings, turn on render to region, turn on crop to render region, then click on your camera, take these and just sort of isolate a particular section if you'd like. go to rendered view, and you're just going to be able to see that section there. Okay, so that's really for those of you who have a difficult time seeing the render update as you're doing this. But for some of us, that's not going to be a problem. So I'm just going to be actually taking this out of camera to view, and we're just going to be moving around the object. Okay. So there are some things that we can sort of deal with here regarding the actual hair shape, and if we zoom in a bit, you can sort of see what's happening here um, without any real materials put on this yet. It's sort of creating a shape here and doing kind of what it wants. But we're gonna sort of alter this and change it according to what we want it to be. But first, we need to actually throw some materials on it to see what we're sort of dealing with here. So I'm gonna hit N to get rid of that. Split my panel here. We're going to go here to the shader editor. And over here on the left, I'm going to have the hair. And over here on the right, I'm going to be having this, the shader editor right here with the node editor. So we're going to go ahead and hit new. And what we're going to do here is we're going to switch this to something else. So instead of principled BSDF, we're going to hit Shift S. You're going to go to shader, and we're going to use principled hair BSDF. Okay. And already, and for those of you who have trouble with the rendering on their computer, you'll start to see that right now. There's a bit more realism happening with how it's being rendered. I'm going to go ahead up here and I'm going to turn off the show overlays just so we can see what it is without it being clouded by some of these overlays. And you can sort of start to see what's happening. Now, direct coloring is not the best way to do this, but if this is what you wanted to do, you could change the coloring here. You could change the what's called radial roughness and the roughness itself. Here, you can add a coat to it, which sort of makes a little bit of a shiny coat on it, like you would see on horsehair or something. All that kind of stuff here. We're really going to go over this in the next setting here. But you could sort of make this if that's what you really wanted to do. What we're going to do here, though, is we're going to change this from direct coloring to melanin concentration. And this is a really wonderful way of doing hair shading. And we're just going to take some of these down a little bit, and I'm going to explain roughly what these do. So melanin is basically just the amount of color in the actual hair. I'm going to take the redness down so you can kind of see what's going on. So if I take the melanin and I drag it all the way to the right, you can see that full melanin is black, no melanin is white, sort of like you would see in people who are older who have white hair, and anywhere in between. So you can see that there's blonde hair here, you can see that there's more brownish hair here, and so on. Then with the melanin redness, if we turn this up, there's actually a red coloring that shows up. Okay. Roughness is exactly like you've seen on other materials. If you turn this all the way up, it's going to be really, really rough. And if you take the radial roughness, which is basically like the roughness of the contour of your hair shapes here, and we turn that all the way up, you can see that it's more sort of like a flat shading. There's really not a whole lot of wetness going on, so to speak, or shininess or oiliness in the hair. Then coat sort of adds a shiny layer to it. And you'll see this a lot with like horsehair, and some of these shaving brushes do have that sort of coat on there. So you can sort of play with that if you'd like. IOR, we're just going to leave that exactly as it is here. Offset, you're going to leave just like that. And we're going to look at random color here. If you take that and turn it all the way up, you can see that it's starting to add a random coloring all throughout your hair, which is a really wonderful way of adding a lot of variation, and it can create some very unique looking hair for whatever it is that you're trying to do. Right now, we're just going to turn that down to 0. And then random roughness does exactly like it says. It just adds randomness to the roughness throughout your entire hair shading and creates something a little bit more unique and different. So the other thing that I haven't really touched on is the tint, and that's basically the overall coloring that's going to be happening to this. So you can sort of click and drag and change change the color to whatever it is that you want. Now, the issue that we have here is if we take a look at the not UV editor, the image editor here, and open up this and zoom in, you can see that we have a changing coloring effect going from the bottom to the top. We have it sort of like a tannish color down here, a black in the middle, and a white on the top. And there really is no way of dealing with that with just the principled hair BSDF. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a node right here. So we're going to add, and what we're going to look for is the hair, search hair info. Okay. And if you hold Control Shift and left click and just sort of keep left clicking this, you can see different sort of ways that it's being presented here. You have sort of these different things here. You have a randomizer here, you have strand, you have intercept, which is really what we're going to be using. You have a thickness, so you can see that it's not as thick down here, but it's thicker down here, but it's not as thick up here. And sort of like this randomness and the tangent normal, and then this random right here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take the intercept and we're going to use that with a color ramp. So go to Shift A, add converter, color ramp, or you can search for it right here. Take the intercept right here, plug it into the color ramp, and hit Control Shift left click and look through the color ramp. And if we take this black here and we move it up, you can see that now from the bottom to the top, it's becoming more black. And if we move that back down and take the white over, you can see that it becomes more white. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to use this to control the tinting of the color from down here through the middle and up to the top. So you can kind of play with this on your own. I already know where some of this stuff goes, so I'm just going to do it sort of quickly here. I'm going to hit the plus button here. It's going to add another flag, pull it over to the left, and this needs to be more of a yellowy color. So we're going to do that. You could also hit this little eyedropper and select the color from your actual image if you'd like. I'm going to add another flag here. It's going to add it sort of between those. Oops. I'm going to move it over here to about there. Click here, click the eyedropper, and I'm going to select this black right in here. And you can kind of see that if we look really closely here, the distance between these could be a little bit softer. So we're going to go from linear. We're actually going to go to ease, which is going to leave a little bit more bleeding room between the two. Okay. We're also going to add another flag. You can see I added it right here. We're going to move it. And we're going to left click this section with the eyedropper. And we can sort of pull that down or pull it up or whatever you'd like to do. Click on the white one here, click on the color field, click the eyedropper, and click the top color here. And from that, you can basically control the overall coloring that you're going to be putting into your hair. Then just take the color here, left click and drag it to the tint, and Control Shift left click the principled hair BSDF. So you can see that the tinting was put in there. If we take the tint and we remove it and then we put it back in, you can see that there is a difference. And I'm just going to save real quick here. But it's not exactly right. There's really a lot of redness going on, and it's not really quite right. And that's because of these settings right here. So let's take the melanin and put it all the way down this way. And let's take the redness and pull it down as well. And from there, you can see you have a little bit more of what we can expect to see from this here. And you can sort of adjust your colors if you'd like. And you can start to adjust the roughness, which I'm actually going to take the radial roughness. I'm going to put it all the way up. And I'm also going to add a coating because when I actually take the brush that I have and I move it around next to me, I can see that there is some brights that are sort of like reflecting off. And this roughness here, I might just pull it down just a tad, maybe somewhere around here. Let's see what happens if I add a little bit more redness here. So really at this point, you're just sort of playing with some of the settings here and getting it a little bit closer and adjusting. I'm actually going to change this to a sort of lighter gray, I think. Maybe something around here. And maybe pull this down a little bit more. And we're just going to leave it like this for now. So one more thing that we really need to do here is we need to sort of match the shaping of the hair to a little bit more of what we can see here. It seems a little bit more thick here, and then it sort of tapers off to the top pretty quick. And what we have here is a fairly thick base, And then when it gets to the top, it gets a little bit too, um, sort of like fine, a little bit too fast here. So what we're going to do is if we go over here to the particle properties and collapse everything, go down to where it says hair shape. Now this is an area you can get really stuck really fast, and I'm just going to tell you some of the basics, okay? The strand shape is basically going to make the top or the bottom a little bit like tapered quicker or slower, okay? And it's hard to see this stuff if you don't go to the extremes. I'm going to hit Control S here just to save my scene. If you take the diameter root and you take this and make it to like, let's say a 5, and you zoom in, you can see how thick all of that got. And it's not really that great looking, okay? So let's change this back to a 1. And it still looks pretty thick. It almost looks like ramen or something like that, okay? Then if we look closer at the tip here, and if you take this tip and you change it to a 1, for example, you can see that it gets much thicker really, really fast. So again, you have more of like a noodle shape here, okay? And after some of the playing that I've done before, and you can feel free to do this yourself, and I actually recommend that you do that, what you want to do here to sort of match this a little bit closer is we're going to want to change the diameter root to a 1, and the tip, we actually want this to be more of a 0.15, okay? So you can see that it gets a little bit more of like a horsehair shape going on. If we look at this and we change this to a 0 again, you can see how really fine that is. And if you do have one of these brushes, you'll know that it really doesn't get to that, okay? So the tip, let's just change this back to a 0.15 so it's a little bit thicker, okay? Then the next thing here is what's called the diameter scale. And that's basically the sort of like overall shaping that you're going to see here. And again, the best way to sort of understand this is to go to the extreme. So I'm going to put a point or a 1 in here. And don't do exactly what I'm doing because it might take your computer a while. And you can see it's taking my computer kind of forever to render this out. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to change this to a 0.25. And if we change that to a 0.25, you can kind of see how that looks, and it doesn't really look great. So let's change it to a 0.1, and if we zoom in, it's still really, really thick. Change it to a 0.05. It's still pretty thick, not very good looking. And let's change this back to a 0.01, and it's a little too fine for me. So let's try 0.03. And that's going to be a little bit thicker, and I think that's going to work out just fine. If we zoom out a little bit, zoom in a little bit, and you can sort of refine, maybe we go to a 0.02 or something like that, whatever you think fits. And it really does help to have one of these available. If you don't have one, totally fine. But if anything, just really take a close look at your reference material and try and match as closely as possible. Now you could go ahead and go in here and use the random here and change some of this information, like the coloring and mix stuff together. But since this is more for beginners, I'm trying to keep it a little bit more simple. You could also try and use the thickness here and pipe it into the color ramp and see what that does. But intercept is really going to get us closer to what we're looking at. So next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create the handle here. Okay. And this we're going to kind of blow through a little bit quicker because hopefully you're not a fresh beginner on this, but I'm going to show you basically my method on creating this sort of thing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click on the object here, and I named this brush hair. And we're going to actually turn off the particle by going to the modifier properties here and clicking this little icon right here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A, add mesh circle. Okay, and then go to edit mode with tab, hit 1 to view from the front, and we're sort of going to build this out in a very simple way that's going to create something kind of neat. Okay, so we're going to hit E and then Z immediately and drag it down. Then you're going to hit A and you're going to hit E again, right click, S to scale, Shift Z to do it on every dimension except Z. We're just going to pull this out, okay, just to create some thickness, okay, just like this. So right now you should have basically a cylinder. Now you could have done this with just a cylinder, but I like to make things difficult for you, okay? So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to start to make some of these shapes here. We're going to start to make this little bevel shape and everything else. So hit Tab, you're going to hold Alt and left click this here. We're going to hit Control B, hold Shift and drag, and you can see that now we're creating a sort of bevel shape, okay? We just want that to be maybe something kind of like this here. Okay. Then we're going to take this section right here. We're going to hit, go to wireframe actually. We're going to hit E and then Z to pull it down a bit. And then we're just going to hit F to close that off. And if we hit the backslash on our numpad here, and let me actually turn on the screencast key so you can sort of see what I'm doing. Oop. You can see that I've created this sort of shape right here. Okay. And if we go to the bottom, what we want to do here is grab this. And let's actually delete these faces right in here. So we're going to hit X, delete faces. Basically what I did there is I just I held Alt, left clicked so I can grab the entire loop, hit X, delete faces, and now we have something a little bit more clear on what we're doing here. Okay. So we don't have any doubled up faces or anything like that. All right. So now the bottom here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this. And we're actually going to hit E, hit Z, pull it up just a tad, and then hit F. Okay, just like that. Then to create this little bevel that you see right down here, go to Edge Select right here, hold Alt, left click right here to get this loop, hit Control B, and we're just going to create a little bit of a bevel. Okay. And you can make this as accurate to this if you want. I'm sort of like, you know, freestyling this just to get this done. So next thing that we're going to do here is you can see right here in the middle, there's this sort of like cut right here. Okay. Hit Control R. We're going to create a loop cut. So Control R, left click right there, and then right click to set it in the center. We're going to go to solid mode here, and we're going to go to the edge select right here. So now we have this edge selected, hit Control B, hold shift, pull it out, and you can see that now we're creating sort of like a cut with a set of geometry right in the middle there. And what we're going to do is we're going to create this cut right in here by hitting E, right click, S, shift, Z, and keep holding shift and just pull it in just a bit. Okay? So now we have this sort of shape right in here. Now what we need to do is we need to extend this out a little bit more, pull this out since it tapers like larger down here. So go to Vertex select, go to wireframe, left click and drag to box select all this. Make sure you have the selection box selected up here in your toolbar. S, Shift Z, and you'll pull that out a bit. And you can see that our shaping is a little bit off here. This is taller than this. See that? So left click and drag all of this, pull this a bit down on Z, maybe something like that. And then this needs to be a little bit longer here. So grab and pull it down on Z. And now you should have something that looks kind of like this. So let's go ahead and right click, shade smooth, and we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier here, just like that. And we're going to also go to edge select, and we're going to set some vertex and edge properties. So go up to item, you'll see there's mean crease, mean bevel weight. Add a bit of a mean crease here, maybe to about there. And we're going to left click and add a bevel to that because we're going to end up adding a bevel modifier. Same thing right here. We're going to Alt Shift and left click both of these loops here and add a bevel weight. And then at the top here, right in here, we're going to also add a bevel weight there. Okay. Right. So over here on the modifier panel, add a bevel. It's going to show up below your subdivision surface modifier. You're going to left click and drag this up above. And we're going to change the limit method here to weight. And you'll see that it just added some beveling here, and you can left click and drag this to set whatever bevel weight you think is good. I'm actually going to pull the crease off of this. And let's change the viewport to about a 2, so that's going to be more or less the geometry of this brush. Okay? Now let's add some really quick materials here. We're not going to do too much craziness. Hit N here. And we're going to go to a rendered view. and you can see that it's all white. Okay, so go back to solid, hit tab. We're going to make two different materials here. So we're going to go to the front view, vertex select, go to wireframe, left click and select all of this here, control plus to add more to our selection. We're going to go to the materials properties, add new, and we're going to call this material rough metal. And you can click assign if you want, but it's not going to do anything until we have a second material. So then we're going to hit the plus right here. Over here in this panel, control I to invert our selection. And we're going to add a new material, and we're going to call this shiny metal. Okay, and then we're going to click assign. Now, let's go into object mode and then go into rendered. And then over here, we're going to change this to the shader editor. For shiny metal here, take the roughness down, take the metallic up, and there we have kind of a shiny metal. Okay. Then for the rough metal, you're going to take the roughness, let's actually keep it at a 0.5, change the metallic to a 1, and now you have a rough metal. And you could add more materials to this. You could add a bump map, whatever it is that you want to do. If you don't know how to make PBR materials, you can always check out my beginner's tutorial series on basic geometric shapes where I talk about PBR materials. And let's go ahead and come out of local view by hitting the backslash on the numpad. Let's select the brush hair and let's actually turn them on in the particle settings or right here in your modifier properties. Turn that on. And now you can see we have our brush here. Okay. And you can adjust and change the coloring and all that you'd like to do to make this look a little bit better. Change the shaping on your hair, change the length if you want to go back into the weight painting, whatever it is that you want to do. This is the opportunity to go ahead and do that. So let's go back into solid mode. We're going to add a floor plane here by hitting Shift A to add, and we're going to go to plane S10. Let's actually hit S again and do another 10. Okay, make it really big. We're going to go to the front view here by hitting 1, grabbing on the Z, pulling it down, and then applying the scale by hitting Control A, scale, and we're going to hit new material. We'll go to the materials properties, hit new. We're going to call this ground or floor, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to add a PBR material to the ground plane here to make it a lot easier for us when we're doing our render, so we have a really nice material right below it. So click on the principled BSDF, Control Shift T, and we're going to go to wherever you've saved your texture. And for me, it's going to be a concrete. Here it is. So I'm going to grab all this with a box select, and then you're going to click this right here that says Principled Texture Set. And then now, when we go to our rendered view, you should have a PBR material right there on the floor. And if we look over here to the mapping that's been created inside of our node editor here, you can change the scaling to be bigger or something like that. So like set it at 3 or something like that. Or maybe left click and drag down a 5, something like that maybe. Let's go to our camera here. I'm going to hit N, go to view, camera to view, hit N again, and then you can just sort of set up whatever your composition is that you want to render. So you can go ahead and hit F12 at this point, and you can render out your image and have a really nice example of a practical use of the hair emission settings and principled hair BSDF shading and all of that. So hopefully you're able to follow along with me here. The great thing about videos, you can always go back, try it again, and keep watching and testing it out to make sure that you're getting everything right. And if you have any questions, please hop on the Discord. The link to the Discord server is in the information down below. And again, please like and subscribe the video if you like this tutorial and you'd like to see more. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.